Hi, I'm Deanna Springer.
And I'm Dana Casey with the Fun Stitch-It Sisters Sewing Project and Classic Time-Saving Tips by Nancy Zieman.
First, let's take a look at the project we're making today. We'll be stitching our new Sew Organized Utility Totes with Glowhaven fabrics by Lila Tuller for Riley Blake Designs, Clover's 2-inch bias tape maker, Clover's 6-in-1 stick and stitch seam guide, size 80 sewing machine needles, and our new Sew Organized Utility Tote pattern.
Make one or more of our Sew Organized Utility Totes and organize your sewing room, storage, or any closet in your home with our designer fabric totes.
To make our Sew Organized Utility Tote, we'll first prepare our fabrics. Head to the ironing board and steam and press those fabrics, and then add a layer or two of spray starch. That'll really give the fabric a nice hand while you're sewing and stitching the project together. Another classic time-saving tip by Nancy Zieman. We always use spray starch to prepare our fabrics for the project. And for making our utility tote, we're just making ours from 2 layers of cotton fabric. The tote folds really compactly with just 2 layers. There's no interfacing in this tote, and it folds up so compactly, yet it can carry and hold many items. They're great for storing quilts in your closet and things like that. So we've prepared our fabrics, and if you would like your tote to have a little bit more stand-up, a little more body, use cotton canvas as your inner tote, and that will give it some stability, a little bit of a stand-up tote. For our project, we are using 2 cotton quilting fabrics. The next step would be to make our pattern. So we'll set our utility tote aside, we'll bring it back, and we need to make a pattern. So from pattern making paper, we're going to cut a rectangle.
Okay.
It's 25 inches long by 20 inches wide. And it's cut on the fold. So really, it's 40 inches wide by 25 inches long. And then we need to make the gussets so the bag has some depth. So we'll be using a 6-inch ruler, and we'll mark with a marking pen that 5-inch square in just the one lower corner because this is cut on the fold.
Okay.
The next step would be to cut out our shapes. For each bag, you'll need 2 layers of inner lining fabric and 2 layers of outer fabric because you have a front and a back and an inner tote front and a back.
Okay.
So you'll lay your pattern on your fabric and you'll cut out your shapes. 4 layers. You can cut 2 layers at a time if you'd like. And then make sure you cut out your lower 5-inch corners.
And then you have some nice 5-inch stacker squares for other projects like quilting or little handy projects around.
Yeah, hang on to those fabric scraps. They come into good use. Great tip. I'll set this over here. The next step would be to fold under. Fold under the outer tote along the top edge and press. Press using an iron and a hot ruler. So just advance your hot ruler and press under 1 inch across the entire top of the front, the back, and then both lining pieces or inner tote pieces. So we'll set that aside and come back to that. So here is our lining tote, and it's already pressed under both layers. The next step would be to make some handles. We're going to cut crosswise fabric strips. And for our tote, we've cut 4. Just cut 4 crosswise fabric strips, the width of the fabric, and then we seam them together. We'll head to the sewing machine, and with right sides together, we'll seam them into one long strip.
And we'll want to make sure to cut off the selvages
Right.
so we don't have that little...
You don't want that bulk in there. The selvages have extra threads in there, and you cut that off and then just seam them together. And you can just use straight seams until you have a continuous loop. It's about 80 inches long.
Yes.
But you're the designer, so you could shorten that if you wanted a shorter shoulder strap, or if you wanted a handle tote, then you can shorten it even more. So
Okay.
the next step after you cut and sew your crossvice fabric strips is to insert it into the 2-inch bias tape maker. Clover has a wonderful 2-inch bias tape maker. You just advance the fabric into the tool at the ironing board and press as the fabric comes out of the folder folded. And then once it's folded and pressed, we'll fold it again and press. And then we'll head to the sewing machine and we'll edge stitch. And this works great with Clover's 6-in-1 stick and stitch seam guide. We'll edge stitch along each edge of that handle. But before we do that edge stitching, we need to turn it into an entire loop. So we've sewn our crossvice fabric strips into a continuous loop. That's when we edge stitch. So we've edge stitched along both sides and we have a giant loop. And we just need to find the halfway mark and put a wonder clip in there and mark that halfway mark. And we'll show you where that goes on the outer fabric in a couple steps. The next step is to finish the lining. So after the top edges are folded under 1 inch, then we unfold. That fold will keep its memory.
Okay.
So we'll unfold that and then we'll pin. We'll place pins all the way down the seam and we'll head back to the sewing machine and we'll stitch. Once your sides are stitched, we've already stitched that lower hem. When you turn the bin side seam and lower seam together, it naturally forms that gusset. That seam just takes form and then you stitch that lower seam. The next step is to attach the handle to the outer tote. So on this sample, we've already sewn the bottom seam with our serger. We'll open that up and I've pressed a marked line. This is the center of the tote. So I've placed right sides together and I've pressed that long seam all the way from the back to the front.
Okay.
And the next step would be to mark the handle placement. So that's just a crease for our ruler placement. So I like to take a 6x24 ruler and mark that handle placement. So this is the top of the tote, this is the center bottom seam, and that's the top of the back of the tote.
Okay.
So I like to take a 6x24 inch ruler, a rotary cutting ruler. I place the ruler on the 3-inch mark onto that fold. And this is super easy marking. Because we want the handles 6 inches apart, I just mark 3 inches on that side of the fold and 3 inches on this side of the fold. And that gives us 6 inches between handles. So we'll slide the ruler along your edge, and slanty board's not wide enough, but you get the idea.
Then
right
you
on that fold
continue the
line,
mark.
and you can continue that fold, that marked line, and that's our handle placement. Our handle is one large loop.
Yes.
So we just take the ruler away and we bring back our loop handle. And we've already taken the loop in half and found that center point on the left and the right. Well, that now will become our placement for the lower tote. So I use that halfway mark on the handle with that halfway mark on the lower tote, which is the seam.
Oh, very good.
And I just place that mark, that wonder clip, to the lower tote and I pin. And you'll be doing this on your cutting table, not on a slanted board. And wonder clips are great, but you still need pins for this step. So you'll place pins on the handle, holding the handle to the tote, the outer tote only, and then we'll head to the sewing machine.
Well, you want to make sure before you start stitching that you're not twisted.
Right, so you want to check your handle in your loop to make sure there are no twists in it. That'll be a surprise designer touch if that happens. We'll continue pinning, hopefully not to the board. We'll continue pinning those straps, that one continuous strap to the tote, and then we head to the sewing machine. The next step is to double stitch or duplicate stitch right over that previously stitched line.
Okay.
So when we sewed the strap, we top stitched along each edge with that seam gauge, and that's our stitching line. So we'll just stitch along that stitching line all the way to the back of the tote, turn the corner and back, stitch on both sides of that handle, and then that handle will be attached to the tote front. The next step is much like the lining. We'll meet our side seams, right sides together, again folding up that seam, and we'll pin.
Okay.
So you have some pins on your cushion. I've pretty much depleted my pins, and we'll pin that side seam. We'll virtually stitch it. And this is just a repeat of the gusset that we did to the lining. Same steps. You'll meet that side seam stacking to that lower seam, and you'll serge that gusset seam on both lower sides. Then you'll want to turn this, and you'll turn it right sides out, and then you'll insert the lining into the tote. So the inner tote is set down into the outer tote, wrong sides together.
Okay.
And you can pin or wonder clip all the way around the outside. And you just align the side seams and pin, and then head to the sewing machine and top stitch. So there's no turning. This is just inserted into the outer tote and then top stitched. And then if you'd like, you could do a second row of top stitching 3/4 of an inch in from that first stitching line.
Just thinking to myself, as you said, put the second line, you could put a decorative stitch in between the two lines, because we have so many decorative stitches that we probably don't utilize them like we could.
And that would be a great time to do that. Choose a contrasting thread, maybe a green for this fabric, and maybe a leaf stitch. That would be really pretty. This is a great tote, as we mentioned, to store quilts. I first made a tote like this when my daughter was really young, and we would go camping. We'd take our bedding. We each had our bedding bag, and our pillow and our blanket would fit in here, and we'd go camping on camping trips.
Cute. I think she brought that over when I used to babysit for her with her blanket and pillows in
It was blue and white with a red handle.
And our So Easy Organized Utility Totes fold for easy storage. I keep one in my car for essentials that I keep in my trunk.
We hope you've enjoyed the Stitch It Sisters project. You'll find this pattern along with a limited number of project bundle boxes at stitchitsisters.com.
Be sure to tune in again for another Stitch It Sisters sewing adventure.
In the meantime, connect with Stitch It Sisters and friends on our social sites. Stitch It Sisters is made possible by Bernina, Clover, Hellon, Riley Blake Designs, OESD, Oklahoma Embroidery Supply and Design, and shopnzp.com.
Bernina, made to create.